Hello, everybody. Welcome to this presentation by the American Topical Association, our Spring into Topicals series. Today we have a very good program by our own Dionne Hamman, The Incredible Births and Tragic Lives of the Dionne Quintuplets. We're going to travel back to 1934 for the birth of the Dionne sisters, the first quintuplets to survive, and what happened to them over the years since. So Dionne Hamman is the president of the American Topical Association. She has done many presentations for us, and she's very good at it. So with that, I will turn it over to Dionne. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I'm not good at is technology, but thanks to all these good minds here this evening, we got that solved. I looked at the list of people who have registered this evening, and I'm delighted that we have quite a few people who are not yet ATA members. We don't have time to tell you all the great things you get when you join ATA. We hope you enjoy the program. We have programs throughout the year. We invite you to join us for those programs, but also take a look at americantopical.org and see all the good benefits you get from being an ATA member, and we hope that you will decide to join us.
I do have one more thing to add. If you have a question, you can put it into chat, or we will have time for question and answer at the end of the program.
Thank you, Eric. I guess that I like to call my collecting style spontaneous. That seems a little better than saying impulsive, but I would like to tell you how I happen to have this little collection that I'm going to show you this evening. Post-pandemic, when it was fairly safe to travel, my husband John and I decided that we wanted to go to a lot of stamp shows. We had pent-up demand, and so for a couple of years, we went to a stamp show a month, and I went to, I think, 4 stamp shows in Canada, and that's how this exhibit came about. I have a tendency to look in the dealer boxes, and if I find something that I haven't seen before or something that seems inviting, bam, I'm off on a collection. And I think I'm not the only ATA member who collects this way, because when we go around the room, when we have a meeting and people tell what they collect, we actually have one member that collects 41 topics, and there are many, many members that collect 20-some topics. So I think my style is probably pretty typical. When I was looking in the dealer box at postcards, I came across a little group of postcards on the Dionne quintuplets. And that set me on a walk through memory lane. I remember my mother talking about the Dionne quintuplets and how famous they were, what a wonderful thing she thought it was that they had lived, and so forth. I also have an older sister who's 8 years older than me, who actually had a little doll cradle with 5 babies in it, and I'll show you what that looks like a little while later. There were millions of those sold, and today you can get them on eBay. So I thought, well, let's go on this little adventure and come up with a little collection of postcards on the Dionne quintuplets. Many of you know that I'm an avid postcard collector, and I'd like to just briefly tell you why. And I'll mention this later on too, but picture postcards give us a look at a time in life in our country or in Canada or any other country, a time in life that gives us a look at popular culture, history, in a way that nothing else does. They leave a record in a way that nothing else does, and that's why I really love particularly early 20th century picture postcards. In the year 1908, Americans sent 667 million picture postcards. I tried to since we're talking about Canada here tonight, I tried to come up with the number for Canada, but the Canadian sites cite those American numbers. So maybe it was only the Americans at that time that were keeping track of that. But that's 7 postcards for every man, woman, and child that was in the United States then. So postcards were a big thing. And even in 1934, where our story takes place, postcards were still very popular. The Dionne quintuplets were born on May 28th, 1934. They were the first quintuplets to survive, and they were also identical. I did find out that there were other quintuplets prior to the 1934. It was exceedingly rare in the days before fertility drugs, and none survived. As a matter of fact, multiple births of any size had a low survival rating. I just found another interesting fact today. Right now in the United States, there are about 20 sets of quintuplets born every year. That just blows my mind. That fertility drugs have done that, and for good or not. Okay, let's take a look. Let's travel back to the tiny rural village of Corville. Corville, Ontario in 1934. If you're familiar with Canada, you can see that Corville is out in the middle of nowhere. Corville is near the larger town of Callander, which is shown on this picture postcard. We will see relatively few different publishers of the postcards shown. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. This was printed by the Photo Gelstein Engraving Company in Ottawa. This is a hand-colored lithograph. You can tell lithography done with a printing plate, and in this case in black and white, and then hand-colored, which was very common in those days. Oliver Dionne, 30, and his wife Elzire, 25 and 30, and their 5 children, ages 1 to 8, lived in a small log house. They are a French-speaking farming family, not much more than subsistence living. They do not have electricity. Elzire was pregnant and suspected she was going to have twins. But then, as I said earlier, on May 28, 1934, she went into labor 2 months before the birth was expected. 2 neighbors were called to act as midwives, Aunt Donalda and Madame Benoit Labelle. After the midwives delivered 2 babies and it became obvious that there were more to come, the local country doctor, Alan Roy Defoe, was quickly summoned from his home. Dr. Defoe was a general practitioner with, by today's standards, very little education, and I did read somewhere that at this point he was not even licensed. Of course, you know what happened next. 5 identical girl babies were born. Their total weight was 13 pounds 6 ounces. As I said before, no quintuplets had ever survived, and these were not expected to live either. This is a picture that was taken for the newspaper later, after the quints were older, of the 2 midwives and Dr. Defoe. They wrapped the babies in cotton sheets and napkins. A basket was borrowed from a neighbor, and all 5 infants were placed in it next to the open door of the stove to keep them warm. This is a postcard that was taken later when the basket and the basin that was used to bathe the babies were in a souvenir shop. During the first days, one by one, the babies were taken out of the basket and massaged with olive oil. For the first 24 hours, they were fed every 2 hours with water sweetened with corn syrup. They were watched constantly and often had to be roused. In other words, they quit breathing, one after another, all through the first 48 hours. After the first day, they were fed with a formula of cow's milk, boiled water, corn syrup, and 1 or 2 drops of rum. Dr. Defoe, we're going to hear a lot about Dr. Defoe. He spread the word. Within 6 hours of their birth, the Quints, then named Yvonne, Annette, Cecile, Emily, and Marie, were photographed by the North Bay Nugget, the local newspaper, for all the world to see. The dangerously underweight babies were removed from the basket and positioned next to their dazed mother, who it turns out had barely survived the birth herself. The top postcard is copyright Oliva Dionne, the father. The other one is copyright Star Newspaper Service. Right away postcards were produced. Everyone wanted a piece of the action, but some good did come from that initial frenzy. Charlie Blake, a reporter from Chicago, found an 1895 incubator that did not require electricity because, as I said before, the Dionnes did not have electricity. A second one was found by the Toronto Star, who then had 3 more built from antique blueprints. So they had 5 incubators. The Toronto Hospital for Sick Children sent 28 ounces of breast milk by train each day. The women who provided the milk were paid 10 cents an ounce, which was a welcome payment during the Depression. Within days, the Red Cross provided round-the-clock nurses. By now, Oliva, the father, was worried. How the heck was he going to pay for 10 children? He asked the local priest for advice, and the priest kindly offered to be his business manager. He signed a contract for the Quintuplets to appear at the Chicago World's Fair for 6 months. Almost immediately, the family tried to back out, but the Chicago promoters refused. To go back just a little bit, people were fascinated with tiny babies and incubators. I guess maybe they still are, but back in those days, this was really something unique. Here are 2 tourist attractions at the turn of the century where people could see babies in incubators. One at the very famous White City Amusement Park in Chicago, a postcard by Kirk Tyke Company, which was the largest producer of postcards in the United States for sure, but maybe in the world. At the height of the postcard craze, Kirk Tyke employed 10,000 printers working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The other card, if you look over on the right, you see a sign, and that says babies, incubators, infant incubators. And that is at the Vanity Fair Amusement Park in Providence, Rhode Island. This is a group of Canadian Red Cross nurses that took care of the babies. The parents were persuaded to sign over custody to the Red Cross for 2 years in order to break the contract for the World's Fair. The Red Cross also agreed to build a state-of-the-art hospital for the babies. The hospital was built quickly, and the babies were sealed in a sterile environment. The parents rarely saw them. We're going to see unfold a exclusivity contract for the images of the quintuplets. At this point, that was probably in force, and that's why this postcard could be published, because it doesn't show the quints. This was printed by the Northern Publishing Company, an arm of the Nugget, that newspaper we talked about before. This shows the location of the Dionne house and the hospital. Very remote. And now the story heats up a bit. This is Mitchell Hepburn, the Premier of Ontario. In March of 1935, they pushed the Dionne Quintuplets Act through government, and the girls were made wards of the Crown until they turned age 18. Mr. Hepburn said, "We're going to do this to protect them from exploitation." And of course, that didn't happen. The court appointed 3 guardians: Dr. Defoe, who we've met before, Judge Joseph Vallon, and Minister of Welfare David Kroll. They had full control over the girls, managing money, creating contracts for business opportunities, and as we will shortly see, there were lots of them. Interesting side note, Judge Vallon, in 1942, when he was 84, he married Trish Provencher, 29, a former nurse for the infants. And that's just an interesting fact that I happened to read. The staff at the hospital included 3 nurses, 3 guards, a housekeeper, and 2 maids. The sisters were tested, studied, examined. Records were kept of everything. This postcard, which shows the hospital, a guard, and the nurse, is also hand-colored, as are other postcards that follow. All of the postcards you see from now on were published by Newspaper Enterprise Association. The money-making opportunities in this were apparent early on. The Guardians signed with the Newspaper Enterprise Association, or the NEA, a news syndication service which held the rights to all images, which is why any other postcard publisher other than the NEA could not publish any views of the girls. This is really unusual at this time in the history of postcards. There was a lot of pirating of postcard images. World's fairs in particular would typically sign a exclusive contract with a publisher, and then other people would come in, take pictures, and just violate that agreement, and there were apparently no repercussions. But in this case, they really could keep a lid on it. Every morning, Fred Davis, a photographer, arrived at 10 o'clock to take the day's photos. They always had a theme, and we'll see some different ones later. Here, obviously, they're out for a ride on their bicycles. Dr. Defoe, always one for self-promotion. Dr. Defoe looked out for Dr. Defoe first, often appeared in the photos. He even had a radio broadcast to dispense child care advice. This is a physician with really no pediatric education or experience. His radio program, was sponsored by Lysol and other products. By the time the girls turned 18, Dr. Defoe was a very rich man. He went from being a country doctor to a baby expert overnight. As I said before, the photos often had a theme: gardening, a train ride, playing with sand pails. They have to get the theme all ready for when the photographer got there every day. The girls went to a play yard 2 or 3 times a day. Wire mesh was placed on the fence so that the crowds could see the girls, but the girls could not see the crowds. However, the girls were smart and they could hear people, and they soon learned to ham it up for a laugh. The town of Corbel has certainly never seen crowds like this. Just look at this. This is really incredible. They had to drive far out of town to actually see this. They would wait in line for hours and hours for just a 2 or 3 minute view of the girls. People parked on what had been the Dionne's farmland. There was no charge to see the quints, as the Guardian said it would be exploitations. There are lots of these postcards showing crowds because they did not picture the quintuplets, so other publishers could print and sell them, such as this one. Well, this really says it all, doesn't it? I don't know J. Dionne. I don't find any J. Dionne, but possibly this was a relative that had a souvenir shop. But you could see when you could see the quints the next time. 6 days a week, 3,000 people a day. In just a few years, more than 3 million people had visited. Quintland, as it came to be called, was Ontario's biggest tourist attraction. Hear this now, it had more visitors than Niagara Falls. It was only rivaled as a tourist destination by Radio City Music Hall and Gettysburg in the United States. These are some typical messages. These cards were sent later, 1937, 1939. There are hundreds of people here having a swell time. These kids are certainly cute. The word got out that Corbel or the Dionne family had some power with fertility. And so stones, people could take free stones that were fertility stones that were kept right there at the grounds. When they started, they took stones from the actual grounds, but they soon ran out of stones on grounds. So they hired a couple men who would go to the beach and collect stones. And as the years went by, the stones on the beach got scarcer and scarcer, and the workers would have to go farther and farther away to get the fertility stones. And you see the sign says stones from Defoe Hospital, and the doctor even had the hospital name for himself. The girls' images were used to sell many, many things, including Karo syrup, Quaker oats, Lysol, Palmolive soap, Beehive corn syrup, Carnation milk, Baby Ruth candy bars, and more. Money said to be going into a trust fund for the girls was actually being used to run the hospital, pay Dr. Defoe, and fund travel, meals, and lodging for visiting consultants, of which there were many. You get the idea. Madame Alexander dolls, this is what my sister had. Quinty paper dolls. Teaspoons, 10 cents each. If you go on eBay, you'll find lots more things. They even had feature films in which the girls actually appeared. I tried to watch one of these films on YouTube or, some other streaming way. The only one I could find was the Country Doctor, which was on a streaming service that I don't subscribe to, so I couldn't look at it, but some of you might want to see if you could watch these movies. Souvenir shops, lots of souvenir shops. They were opened by the midwives who had delivered the babies, by the father, Oliver Dionne. Religious fertility items were for sale. The midwives and the father signed autographs. It was a real zoo. The girls were photographed before each holiday. They had to do it before the holiday so that the postcards would be ready in time for the holiday. Here they are before their first communion. On Christmas, they held empty packages in their photo, etc. Within the first 5 years, profits from tourism and products was estimated to be over $1 billion. That's in 1934 to 39. When the girls were 9, the parents were able to regain custody. The girls' money was used to build a 19-room mansion for the entire family. By now, the Dionnes had 14 children. This was the beginning of 9 terrible years for the quintuplets. They were treated like servants and made to feel guilty for the experiences that the whole family had had. They struggled to communicate as the quints spoke English and the others spoke French. The family constantly berated them and reminded them of all the problems they had caused for the family. The mother was abusive, and the father sexually abused 3 of the girls. The girls left home as soon as they turned 18 and had little contact with their family after that. Emily, who had health problems throughout her life and was subject to seizures, joined a convent and died of a seizure at age 20. It was said that the nun who was supposed to be watching her was not watching her, and that she had a seizure and died without help. Yvonne attended nursing school before turning to sculpting and later became a librarian. Marie married, had 2 daughters, and divorced. She died in 1970 of a blood clot. Annette married, had 3 sons, and divorced. Cecile married, had 5 children, and divorced. In 1997, the 3 surviving sisters were living at near poverty level. They reached a $4 million settlement with the Ontario government as compensation for their exploitation and were able, after that, to live comfortably, although they shared that money with their children, and so I'm not sure how much there was to go around. The surviving sisters, age 90, will be 91 in May, came forward this past year to protest the plan to move the original house to a fairground in a nearby town. The house had been moved several times, and the sisters were successful in getting the town to vote to move the house to a city park. The problem today is that money is not allocated for upkeep for the building. It is not a popular tourist destination, so who knows what's going to happen to that house. As I said before, Picture postcards tell the story of a life at a specific time in history in a way that nothing else does. We learn what people were thinking and doing, what entertained them. There is no doubt that the Dionne quintuplets were exploited by their parents, their doctor, and the government of Ontario. Could it happen today? I hope not. I'd like to end by telling you a personal story of mine related to quintuplets. In the 1980s, I was Director of Public Affairs and Development at the University of Illinois College of Medicine. At the University Hospital, the Helms quintuplets were born on March 2nd, 1987, and I had the privilege and the pleasure to get to know them, to visit them fairly often, to film them, interview them, and so forth. This is Roz and Rich, the parents, and the quintuplets. Two of the quintuplets, Shannon, over on the far left, was the smallest, and she had and continues to have some health problems. The boy, whose name is escaping me, has muscular dystrophy and also has had ongoing health problems. The hospital photographed the quintuplets every year for their birthday, and the pictures all through the years appear on the walls of the hospital. The Helms were middle class people that lived in a small tract house in a subdivision. I visited them there, and basically every inch of that house was devoted to something related to the quintuplets. They did have 24-hour nursing. They had women that came in from their church and their neighborhood that cleaned and cooked and did laundry, and they got all kinds of help. The newspaper in Peoria has followed this family all through the years. Every year when they had a birthday, there's an article. The Helms quintuplets are now 38. Their pictures show well-adjusted adults teasing each other, having fun on a birthday. So this is a happy quintuplet story. I don't recall if Roz took fertility drugs or not, but this was a happy ending to this family and hopefully many others as well.